Naomi Carter's alarm rang at 5:30, but she was already awake. Sleep never clung to her for long, not when her mind carried lists of chores and tomorrow's weight pressing on today. She slipped from her narrow bed, tugged on her worn jeans and a faded navy sweater, and tied her hair back in a simple knot. Outside, dawn had not yet cracked over the Connecticut sky. The streets were quiet wet from a light rain that had fallen in the night, the streetlights casting a silver sheen across the pavement. She pulled on her sneakers and stepped out into the chill air, heading toward the cafe where she worked 6 mornings a week. The cafe stood on the corner of a street lined with bookstores, laundromats, and small offices that would not open until much later. Its red neon sign hummed faintly in the half-dark. Naomi pushed through the door, the bell above jingling. The smell of brewed coffee and baked bread wrapped around her instantly. She flicked on the lights and moved through the space with practiced ease, arranging chairs, wiping down counters, checking the pastry case. The rhythm was familiar, steadying almost like a heartbeat she could lean on. At 6 sharp, the first customer shuffled in. He was a man Naomi recognized well, a regular who wore the same frayed coat every morning. His beard was uneven, his hands chapped. Most people in town passed him by without a glance. Naomi always greeted him with a gentle smile. She poured his coffee before he even asked, set it on the counter, and slipped a muffin into a small paper bag. He fumbled with his wallet, embarrassment flickering in his eyes. "It's on the house today," she said softly. His shoulders sagged in relief, gratitude shining where words failed him. Naomi turned away before the flush could rise to her cheeks. She never thought of these gestures as charity. To her, they were simply what one human owed another. By 7:30, the cafe filled with commuters in pressed suits, students rushing to class, mothers with strollers. Naomi moved among them with quiet efficiency, refilling cups, remembering names, listening without judgment to stories shared over steaming mugs. She did not stand out, and she preferred it that way. Yet those who looked closely would see the steadiness in her gaze, the calm in her manner, the rare gift of someone who carried the world without demanding it notice. Across town, another scene unfolded in stark contrast. Isabella Carter, Naomi's younger sister, stood before a mirror, taller than she was, wrapped in a silk robe. Sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows of their mother's apartment, catching the glimmer of the diamond studs in Isabella's ears. A makeup artist bent over her face, dusting shimmer across already luminous skin. A stylist adjusted the fall of her dark hair until it curled in waves over her shoulders. Laughter bubbled from Isabella's lips as she scrolled through her phone, replying to messages from friends already buzzing about the gala tonight. Their mother hovered close, clutching a glass of orange juice with perfectly manicured fingers. Her eyes sparkled with ambition as she looked at Isabella, pride radiating, as if she had sculpted perfection herself. "Tonight is important," Mrs. Carter reminded. "The Blackwell Foundation Gala is where doors open. You will make an impression, darling." Isabella's smile widened. "When do I not?" Mrs. Carter kissed the air beside her daughter's cheek, then glanced briefly at the clock. She did not ask about Naomi. She rarely did. Word had spread through the city that Ethan Blackwell himself would attend tonight's gala. The billionaire CEO, the elusive philanthropist, the man who had appeared on Forbes covers, yet kept his personal life sealed tighter than a vault. He was in his early 30s, brilliant and disciplined, carrying the kind of power that could alter futures with a single nod. Women whispered about him in admiration, men spoke his name with respect. To have his attention even for a moment was a prize. Mrs. Carter believed with certainty that Isabella was the one who could capture it. Back at the cafe, Naomi wiped the last table as the morning rush slowed. She paused by the window, watching the blur of traffic move like currents of a restless river. A flyer taped to the glass caught her eye, a glossy advertisement for the Blackwell Foundation gala tonight at the Metropolitan Museum. She had heard her mother and Isabella talking about it for weeks. Isabella had been fitted for a designer gown. Naomi had not been invited. She had not even been considered. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A message from her mother glowed across the screen. Remember to iron Isabella's shawl before noon. Do not be late. Naomi exhaled slowly, her shoulders tightening. She was not angry anymore, not even surprised. It had always been this way. Isabella was the star, and she was the shadow, making sure the stars shone brighter. She closed the register, hung her apron, and stepped back, out into the gray morning. The city hummed louder now, alive with anticipation for the night ahead. Somewhere beyond those crowded streets, in a world gilded with wealth and expectation, a billionaire prepared to step once more into the spotlight. Naomi walked toward the bus stop, unaware that her path and his were already drawing closer, pulled by a tide neither of them could see. Mrs. Carter's townhouse smelled faintly of lilies and expensive perfume, the kind of scent Naomi always associated with polished floors and expectations she could never meet. She arrived just before noon, carrying the pressed shawl her mother had demanded. Isabella stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by shopping bags and half-opened boxes modeling dresses, before a cluster of friends who oohed and awed at every turn. The sight of Naomi in her cafe, uniform hair pinned in a no-nonsense bun, earned little more than a passing glance. Finally, Mrs. Carter said, sweeping across the room in her tailored suit, her eyes sharp as glass, "Isabella cannot be late tonight. The Blackwell Gala is not some high school dance. It is an opportunity one your sister was born for." Naomi handed over the shawl, her lips pressed together. She did not argue. She never did. Isabella draped the silk across her shoulders and spun once her reflection, dazzling in the gilt mirror. "Do you think Mr. Blackwell will notice me, Mom?" she asked, her tone lilting, self-assured. "Of course he will," Mrs. Carter replied without hesitation. "Men like him recognize beauty and charm when they see it. You, Isabella, have both. Naomi—" Her gaze slid over her elder daughter as if she were part of the wallpaper. "Naomi is practical, dependable. She belongs where she is, behind a counter. That is not a criticism, it is reality. Every family has its roles." The words landed heavy, though Naomi kept her expression still. Inside, however, something bristled. She wanted to tell her mother she was more than reliable hands and quiet footsteps, that she had dreams even if they did not shimmer beneath chandeliers. But speaking up had never changed anything before. She gathered the empty hanger's folded tissue paper and busied herself with cleanup, while Isabella basked in compliments. Later, when the friends left and the house quieted, Naomi lingered by the window. Outside, city buses roared past, carrying strangers toward lives unmeasured by comparison. She wondered what it would feel like to exist without always being the foil to her sister's radiance. Behind her, Isabella slipped into a new gown, the fabric catching light like water. "Do you know why Mom pushes me forward?" Isabella asked, her tone casual but tinged with triumph. "Because people like Ethan Blackwell do not look twice at girls like you. They want someone who shines." Naomi turned her face calm, her eyes steady. "Maybe," she said softly, "or maybe they want someone who sees past the shine." Isabella laughed, dismissive, already lost in her own reflection. That evening, Naomi returned to her small apartment above the laundromat. She reheated leftover soup, sat at the chipped table, and opened a well-worn notebook. Inside were sketches of coffee shop designs, notes about supply chains, and figures she had been saving for months. She dreamed of owning her own cafe one day, a place where people came not for glamour, but for warmth. She traced the numbers with her fingertip, knowing she was still far from her goal, yet holding on to the hope that one day it might be hers. In the Carter townhouse, meanwhile, Mrs. Carter hovered over Isabella with final instructions. "Tonight, remember to smile, laugh at the right moments, and keep your eyes on Ethan Blackwell. He is the kind of man who changes lives." Isabella adjusted her earrings, her confidence unwavering. "By the end of the night, he will know I am the only choice." Mrs. Carter's eyes gleamed. Exactly. In her heart, she had already written the story, the billionaire and the beautiful daughter, a perfect match. She never once considered that the script could falter. That fate sometimes tilted its gaze toward the overlooked. Naomi sat alone at her table, sipping soup, unaware that the next 24 hours would unravel every assumption her family had built, and that her own quiet strength was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The Metropolitan Museum glittered like a jewel box, under the city lights, its grand steps alive, with photographers' velvet ropes and the sweep of gowns against polished stone. Limousines glided to the curb one after another, spilling out donors, politicians, and celebrities whose names filled gossip columns. Inside the glass doors, chandeliers blazed, casting golden light over marble floors and the hum of a string quartet. Naomi stood near the service entrance, holding a clipboard handed to her by one of the coordinators. She had been roped into helping at the last minute, her mother insisting she make herself useful since she clearly had no other role to play. She wore a simple black dress borrowed from a coworker at the cafe. Nothing glamorous but respectable enough to blend in with the staff. Isabella entered the main hall on her mother's arm, a vision of sequins and practiced confidence. Cameras flashed, people called her name, and she moved as if the entire evening had been orchestrated for her alone. Guests turned to admire her, their whispers affirming what Mrs. Carter had always said: Isabella was the daughter meant for rooms like these. Naomi kept to the shadows, checking seating charts and ensuring waiters carried trays to the right corners. She did not mind being invisible, it was what she knew best. Then a ripple of energy swept through the crowd, the kind that shifted posture and drew every eye toward the entrance. Ethan Blackwell had arrived. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanded attention without effort. He wore a perfectly cut charcoal suit. His tie understated his expression, calm yet impenetrable. Flashes exploded as photographers called out, but he did not slow. His stride carried him directly into the heart of the gala where board members and trustees waited to greet him. Conversations hushed, replaced by the kind of awe reserved for men whose decisions moved markets. Naomi's breath caught despite herself. She had seen his face in magazines on news clips, always framed by headlines about acquisitions and donations. In person, he seemed carved from a world far removed from hers. Isabella's eyes followed him like a hawk's, her smile blossoming as if rehearsed for weeks. She glided forward, introducing herself with poise, her hand extended. Ethan shook it politely, exchanged a few words, but his gaze did not linger. He moved on, acknowledging others with the same distant courtesy. Naomi turned back to her clipboard, reminding herself she had no place imagining more. Half an hour later, while carrying a tray of water glasses across the hall, Naomi stumbled as a guest backed into her. The tray tilted crystal, tumbling water, splashing across marble. A gasp rippled nearby. She steadied herself quickly, setting the tray down and kneeling to gather the fallen glasses. Her movements were quick, controlled, practiced from years of cleaning up messes no one else wanted. Yet in the flurry of embarrassment, she felt a presence crouch beside her. She looked up startled into the eyes of Ethan Blackwell. His hand closed gently around a glass before it rolled away. For a moment, time narrowed to the stillness between them. "Are you all right?" His voice was low even. Naomi nodded, her cheeks burning. "Yes, thank you, I can handle it." She reached for the last glass, but he handed it to her first, their fingers brushing briefly. He studied her face as if seeing something others missed, then gave a slight nod and rose to his full height. Naomi finished quickly retreating with the tray before whispers could swell. But the image of his gaze lingered like a mark pressed deep beneath the skin. Later, as the gala moved into speeches and toasts, Naomi stood near the back, half hidden behind a column. She watched Isabella mingle near Ethan, laughing too brightly, touching his sleeve with casual entitlement. Guests noticed nudging one another, already speculating about a match. Mrs. Carter glowed with satisfaction, convinced destiny unfolded just as she planned. Yet Naomi caught something different. She noticed the way Ethan's eyes drifted away, mid-conversation, the faint reserve in his posture, the lack of warmth behind his smile. He did not look enchanted, he looked detached. When the speeches ended and applause filled the hall, Naomi slipped toward the side corridor, ready to leave. She had done her duty, ensured the logistics ran smoothly, and there was no reason to stay. But as she rounded the corner, a shadow stepped into her path. Ethan stood there, his tie loosened, a glass of sparkling water in hand. Surprise froze her for an instant. "Mr. Blackwell," she managed. He inclined his head. "You work here?" "Not exactly," she admitted. "I was asked to help. My sister and mother are guests." His brows lifted slightly. "Your sister?" Isabella. Naomi nodded. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant swell of music from the hall. Then he said, "You handled yourself well earlier. Most people panic under eyes like those." She blinked, unsure how to reply. It was just spilled water. "It was composure," he corrected gently. His gaze held hers with a steadiness that unsettled her, not because it was unkind, but because it felt like recognition. He set down his glass on the ledge and said, "I would like to speak with you again. Perhaps after tonight." Naomi's heart jolted. She opened her mouth to protest, to insist he must mean Isabella, but the conviction in his tone left no room. He gave a final nod, then turned back toward the crowd, leaving her rooted where she stood, clutching her clipboard, as though it were the only solid thing in the world. Across the ballroom, Isabella laughed in dazzling circles, unaware that the course she assumed belonged to her had already shifted. Naomi pressed her back against the cool stone wall, her pulse thrumming with confusion. She had come tonight invisible and somehow left carrying the weight of being seen. The following afternoon, the society pages and gossip blogs buzzed with photographs from the gala. Isabella Carter's face appeared on several, her gown shimmering under the chandeliers, her smile bold. Yet buried in the coverage was a single image that caught attention more than her polished pose. It showed Ethan Blackwell standing at the edge of the hall, his gaze not on Isabella, but on the older sister behind her. Naomi caught mid-step with a tray in her hands, her expression calm, unaware she was being seen at all. The caption speculated lightly, but most dismissed it as coincidence. Within the Carter household, it was not dismissed. Mrs. Carter sat at the breakfast table with a paper spread before her, her lips tightening as she scanned the column. Isabella poured coffee, her movements sharp. He was distracted, that's all she insisted. He was surrounded by women all night. I was the one he spoke to. Naomi said nothing quietly, buttering toast, but her mother's eyes landed on her with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. Do not imagine for one moment, Naomi, that Ethan Blackwell noticed you. Men like him seek beauty and polish. Do not embarrass your sister by thinking otherwise. Naomi lowered her gaze, hiding the flicker of hurt, though she had no intention of imagining anything. She told herself the moment in the corridor meant nothing, just politeness from a man accustomed to managing people. That evening proved her wrong. The Carter family had been invited to a private dinner hosted by the Blackwell Foundation to thank key attendees. Mrs. Carter practically floated with excitement, convinced it was Isabella's chance to secure her place. Naomi attended only because her mother insisted someone help carry items from the car. She wore the same black dress, simple and modest, certain no one would notice her. The dining hall was smaller than the gala space, intimate, lined with art and warm light. Guests mingled around, a long table set with silverware that gleamed like mirrors. Conversations hushed when Ethan entered. He greeted the hosts, exchanged a few words with dignitaries, then scanned the room. His eyes bypassed Isabella's eager smile and instead paused on Naomi near the doorway. Without hesitation, he crossed to her. "Miss Carter," he said evenly. Naomi blinked, unsure he meant her. Isabella stepped forward, laughing lightly. "Mr. Blackwell, how lovely to see you again." But Ethan's attention did not waver. "I would like a word with your sister," he replied, his tone leaving no space for misunderstanding. The air froze. Mrs. Carter's hand nearly slipped from the stem of her glass. Guests glanced at one another, whispers starting like the rustle of leaves in a storm. Isabella's smile cracked before she recovered, but the damage was done. Naomi's pulse thundered in her ears. She tried to speak, to deflect, but Ethan continued. "If it pleases you, Mrs. Carter, and I wish to ask permission to court Naomi." Silence collapsed over the table, so heavy it pressed against the walls. Mrs. Carter's face drained of color. Isabella's fingers clenched around her clutch, until the rhinestones bit into her skin. Naomi stood stunned, the room tilting around her. No one had ever spoken her name in such a place, let alone with such certainty. At last Mrs. Carter forced a brittle smile. If that is your wish, Mr. Blackwell." Ethan inclined his head once, as if sealing a contract. Naomi found her voice quiet but steady. "As you say." The dinner continued in fractured murmurs, the focus no longer on donations or art, but on the billionaire who had chosen the plain sister over the beautiful one. By the next morning, headlines screamed across digital feeds. Billionaire rejects glittering socialite and chooses her sister. Comment sections boiled with speculation, half derision and half awe. Some praised Ethan for looking beyond appearances. Others mocked Naomi as undeserving, claiming she must have tricked him somehow. At the Carter home, Isabella raged, her words cutting through the walls. "You humiliated me. Do you know what people are saying? That you snatched what was mine." Naomi tried to protest, but Isabella's fury drowned her out. Their mother sided with the younger daughter, her disappointment sharp as a blade. Yet through it all, Naomi could not erase the memory of Ethan's eyes, calm and unwavering, when he had spoken her name. She had not asked for his choice. She did not understand it, but the weight of it settled into her life, like a stone cast into still water, sending ripples she could no longer control. 2 days later, Ethan Blackwell arrived at the cafe where Naomi worked his presence, turning the ordinary morning into something that felt like the edge of a dream. Customers paused mid-sip, staff exchanged startled glances, and the hum of conversation faltered. Ethan ignored the stares, stepping directly to the counter where Naomi stood. She fumbled with a stack of receipts, her hands trembling only slightly. "Mr. Blackwell," she whispered. He inclined his head. "Ethan," he corrected softly. "May we talk?" She led him to a quiet corner table, the furthest from curious eyes. He folded his hands on the polished surface, his expression measured. "I will not pretend romance," he said plainly. "My life is crowded, my work unrelenting. What I need is stability, a partner I can respect, someone who will not be consumed by the spotlight. That is why I chose you." Naomi's breath caught. "You do not even know me." His gaze did not waver. "I saw enough. I saw composure where others seek spectacle. I saw honesty in a room full of performance. I do not require love, Miss Carter. I require trust." The words landed heavy, both startling and oddly grounding. Naomi sat back, her thoughts colliding. She had dreamed of independence, of running her own cafe, not of being tethered to a billionaire whose face filled magazine covers. Yet in her mother's home, she had been invisible, pressed into silence. Here was a man who, in front of the world, had said her name without hesitation. "And if I refuse," she asked carefully. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then I will accept it, but I hope you will not." Her heart warred with itself. She had no illusions of fairy tales, no fantasies about palaces and gowns. Yet something in his steady tone, in the clarity of his eyes, called to the part of her that longed to be seen for who she was, rather than who she was not. After a long silence, she whispered, "I will not stand in the way." He gave a single nod, almost relief, breaking through his composure. "Good. Then we understand each other." Within a week, the wedding was arranged. It was nothing like Isabella's fantasies of society headlines and glittering cathedrals. There were no paparazzi, no elaborate floral arches, no orchestras. Just a quiet ceremony in a small city hall. 2 witnesses and the echo of vows spoken plainly. Naomi wore a simple ivory dress she had bought second-hand. Ethan wore a dark suit, his tie neat, his expression solemn. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, there was no cheer, only the sound of the pen scratching across the marriage license. Mrs. Carter did not attend. Isabella refused even to speak Naomi's name. Naomi did not cry. She did not smile either. She accepted the ring, her voice steady, her hands calm. Afterward, Ethan escorted her to a sleek black car waiting outside. They drove in silence through the city, skyscrapers looming like guardians of another world. At last, they arrived at the Blackwell estate, a sprawling glass and stone mansion, set back from the road by iron gates. The house was beautiful in the way a museum was beautiful, grand, immaculate, yet carrying the chill of emptiness. Inside, polished floors stretched beneath vaulted ceilings. Modern art lined the walls and windows, framed views of manicured gardens. Naomi walked slowly, her footsteps echoing. It did not feel like home. Ethan stopped beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. "This is yours now as much as it is mine," he said. Naomi nodded, though she could not imagine. Belonging in rooms where her reflection looked like a stranger. That night they dined at a long table, set for 20, though only 2 chairs were occupied. The meal was exquisite, prepared by staff who moved silently in and out. Naomi tasted little, her appetite dulled by nerves. Ethan spoke briefly of schedules of commitments he could not shift, of expectations he did not place on her. "You need not attend functions," he assured. "You may live as you choose." She listened, unsure if it was kindness or distance. When the plates were cleared, she excused herself, retreating to a guest room lined with books she did not know if she had permission to touch. Alone, she sat on the bed and pressed her palms together, the ring cool against her skin. She was married to one of the most powerful men in the country, yet felt smaller than ever. Still, somewhere deep within a spark, refused to die. A quiet voice reminding her she had chosen to step forward, rather than remain forever in the shadows of her mother's house. Whatever this arrangement was, it was now her life. And life, she knew, had a way of remaking certainty when least expected. Naomi woke the next morning to the stillness of a house that seemed too large for breath. Sunlight spilled across glass walls and polished floors, illuminating surfaces so clean they reflected her like a ghost. She made her way to the kitchen where a housekeeper offered her coffee in fine china, the gesture polite but distant. Naomi thanked her quietly, retreating to the terrace overlooking the gardens. The view stretched wide, manicured hedges, framing fountains that glittered in the light, yet all of it felt cold. She wrapped her hands around the cup, grounding herself with its warmth. Ethan appeared moments later, already in a dark suit, his tie precise, his phone pressed to his ear. He spoke in clipped tones about mergers, contracts, and deadlines. He nodded to her as he passed, then disappeared into the waiting car that carried him into the city. The silence that followed was heavy. Naomi spent the morning exploring corridors filled with art and bookshelves stacked in perfect order. It was a place designed to impress, not to comfort. By noon, she retreated to her room, opened her notebook, and wrote figures for her cafe dream, reminding herself she still belonged to herself even here. That evening, Ethan returned late. He found her in the library reading by lamplight. He paused at the door, studying her as if caught off guard by the simplicity of the scene. Without a word, he placed a cup of tea beside her before moving to his desk stacked with documents. Naomi glanced at the tea, the steam curling upward, then at his back, bent over papers. It was the first gesture not born of obligation. She whispered thank you, though he gave no reply. Days slipped into weeks, a rhythm forming. Ethan left early, returned late, his presence more shadow than substance. Naomi learned the patterns of the house, the way the staff avoided her gaze, the way society pages continued to mock her as the plain wife who had stolen a billionaire's hand. At a charity luncheon she attended once at his side, whispers followed them like smoke. Women in glittering gowns laughed behind manicured hands. Men looked past her as if she were invisible. She endured it with calm answering questions, with politeness, but little more. Later she overheard someone mutter she was nothing but a placeholder until Ethan came to his senses. That night she found a note slipped beneath her door. The handwriting was strong, deliberate. "You are not invisible. I was just blind." She pressed the paper to her chest, her throat tightening. The next morning, she tucked a scarf she had knitted into the pocket of his coat before he left. He discovered it later that evening when the wind bit cold. He said nothing, only placed it neatly on her chair at dinner, but his eyes lingered longer than usual. The language between them became one of small exchanges. She left a book she had finished on his desk, marked with a sprig of lavender. He placed a rare volume she had once mentioned on her nightstand without explanation. When she thanked him, he only inclined his head, as if acknowledging something larger than words. Yet distance remained. At a gala weeks later, Naomi attended by his side, Isabella reappeared in a crimson gown that caught every light. She cornered Ethan with laughter and easy charm, her voice carrying across the hall. Naomi stood apart, watching her chest tight. A woman nearby sneered softly, "That is the sister he should have chosen." Naomi steadied her breath, holding her head high. When Isabella leaned closer to Ethan, touching his arm, Naomi turned to leave quietly. Before she could slip away, Ethan's voice rang out firm enough to cut through the music. "Excuse me," he said, moving toward Naomi. He offered his hand. "Shall we?" The room fell into shocked silence as he led her to the center of the dance floor. Naomi's heart pounded as his hand settled respectfully at her waist. The music swelled, and for the first time, she was not hidden in the shadows, but turning beneath chandeliers, with the man everyone thought unattainable. His gaze held hers steady, unflinching, as if daring anyone to question his choice. Afterward, whispers multiplied, some mocking, others uncertain, but Naomi felt something shift inside her. Later that night, when they returned home, Ethan paused at the threshold of her room. He seemed about to speak, then only said, "You handled yourself well." She replied quietly, "I prefer things that hold together." His expression flickered, almost a smile, before he retreated. Winter pressed in early. The estate rhymed with frost, the air sharp. Naomi grew accustomed to evenings spent in the library sometimes, with Ethan across the room, their silence companionable rather than cold. One night she dozed in the chair and woke to find a blanket draped over her shoulders. His handwriting on a slip of paper tucked inside rest. She traced the letters with her fingers, a warmth blooming where loneliness had lived. Slowly the vast house shifted from hollow to inhabited. Not yet love, not yet safety, but something alive. The following month brought the Blackwell Foundation's annual winter gala, an event Naomi dreaded but could not avoid. She wore a navy dress, chosen for its modesty, rather than glamour, her hair pinned back with quiet grace. As she stepped into the ballroom at Ethan's side, whispers rose like a tide. People scanned her with eyes that measured and dismissed in the same breath. Cameras flashed, catching Ethan's composed expression and Naomi's steady but restrained smile. Across the hall, Isabella emerged in a gown of silver sequins that clung like liquid light. She glided through the crowd with a confidence sharpened by resentment, her laughter carrying too loudly. She approached Ethan with open arms, ignoring Naomi, as though she were invisible. Ethan, Isabella purred. "I hope you have not been bored without me. It has been far too long." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his tone remained polite. "Good evening, Isabella." Naomi remained calm. Her gaze lowered to her glass of water. Guests circled like vultures sensing drama, their whispers fanning the flames. Isabella leaned closer to Ethan, her hand brushing his sleeve with practiced intimacy. "You know you do not have to pretend," she said softly, but not softly enough. "Everyone knows Naomi does not belong in this world. She is plain, quiet, forgettable. You deserve someone who can match your stature." The words sliced through the air loud enough to silence conversations nearby. Naomi felt her chest constrict, but she did not flinch. Ethan set his glass down with deliberate care. His voice, when it came, was steady, carrying across the hall. "On the contrary, I value her counsel more than any empty flattery. She is my wife. That is all that matters." Gasps rippled outward. Isabella's painted smile faltered, her eyes narrowing with fury. Mrs. Carter, standing near the buffet, paled as if struck. Naomi looked up, stunned, her breath tangled in her throat. Ethan's gaze met hers unwavering, as if anchoring her in place. The evening pressed on, but the tone had changed. Guests shifted uneasily, some whispering approval, others disapproval. Naomi bore their stares with quiet dignity, though inside her heart pounded like a drum. Later in the car ride home, silence stretched between them. At last she murmured, "You did not have to defend me." Ethan's eyes remained on the dark road. "Yes, I did." She turned her face to the window, the city lights blurring, and felt something fragile stir within her chest. Days later, the gossip columns exploded. Headlines sneered about the billionaire's devotion to a plain wife, dissecting Naomi's every flaw. Online commentators mocked her clothes, her background, her lack of glamour. Naomi scrolled briefly, then set the phone aside, refusing to let their cruelty take root. Still the sting lingered. Isabella fanned the flames, granting an interview where she implied Naomi had manipulated Ethan. Their mother avoided Naomi's calls entirely. Yet through the storm, Ethan remained unshaken. He returned home earlier some nights, joining Naomi for simple dinners in the kitchen, rather than formal meals in the dining hall. He listened when she spoke, about books she loved, asked questions about her cafe dream. He never showered her with compliments, but his steady presence spoke louder. One evening he found her sitting on the terrace, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Do you regret this?" she asked quietly. He paused, the night air cool between them. "No," he said simply. "Do you?" She shook her head. "I do not regret you. I only regret that the world hates me for being me." He studied her for a long moment before saying, "Let them. Their opinions change with the wind. What matters is where you choose to stand." His words rooted deep, giving her strength she did not realize she craved. Still, the shadow of Isabella and their mother loomed. Naomi knew the peace could not last. The family who had dismissed her all her life would not remain silent now that she stood at Ethan's side. Something harsher was coming, and she braced herself, though she could not yet know just how sharp the blade would be when it finally fell. Naomi had barely poured her morning coffee when the intercom at the Blackwell estate buzzed to life. The guard announced Mrs. Carter had arrived, uninvited, her voice sharp, even through the static. Naomi's stomach tightened, but she nodded for them to let her in. Minutes later, her mother swept into the kitchen, her perfume cloying her heels, clicking against marble. She looked around the vast room with disdain before settling her eyes on her elder daughter. "We need to talk," she declared, her tone brooking no argument. Naomi set her cup down. "About what about Ethan?" Mrs. Carter said flatly. "About the damage you are causing. He was supposed to be Isabella's future. Do you think for a moment you are suited for his world? Do you not see how everyone laughs at you? You embarrass us." Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "He chose me," she said quietly. "Not her, not you, me." Her mother's lips thinned. "He chose wrong, and you know it. You will end this marriage before you destroy your sister's chance. Divorce him, walk away. That is what a good sister would do." The words hit like cold steel. Naomi felt heat rise in her chest, but she forced calm into her voice. "You never asked me what I wanted. You never thought I was enough for anything. And now, when for once someone sees me, you want me to give it up for Isabella again." Mrs. Carter's eyes narrowed. "Do not twist this. I am protecting our family's reputation. Isabella was born to shine. You were born to serve. Accept it." Something broke inside Naomi, then a dam holding back years of dismissal. Her voice sharpened. "No, I will not be your pawn anymore. I am not your shadow. If Ethan wants me, that is his choice. Not yours, not Isabella's. Mine." Fury flared in her mother's face. "You selfish girl. Do you think he truly loves you? You are convenient, that is all. And when he tires of you, where will you be? Alone, mocked, discarded. Spare yourself that humiliation and walk away now." Naomi's hands trembled, but her gaze did not falter. "If he leaves me, then I will stand alone. But at least it will be on my own terms. I will not live my life bowing to your script." Mrs. Carter's expression twisted into something cruel. "Then you are no daughter of mine." With that, she turned heels, striking hard against the floor, and stormed about, leaving silence in her wake. Naomi sank into a chair, her body trembling, though her spine remained straight. Hours passed before Ethan returned from meetings, his coat damp with evening rain. He found her in the library, her eyes red, though she held herself composed. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low. She met his gaze, the pain plain. "My mother was here. She demanded I divorce you, so Isabella could have her chance." Ethan stiffened, his jaw hardening. "And what did you tell her?" Naomi's lips curved into a sad smile. "That I would not be a pawn in her game. That if you want safety, you should choose Isabella, because she is perfect for that role." For a moment, silence pressed between them, heavy as stone. Then Ethan stepped closer, his voice breaking with something raw. "No, she was never the choice. You were." Naomi's eyes widened, her breath faltering. She had never heard such conviction from him, never felt his walls crack so openly. The words struck deep, stirring both fear and longing. He reached out, hesitated, then let his hand fall. "I thought I needed someone safe, someone who would not hurt me. But the truth is, Naomi, you were the only one I saw clearly, even when I tried to deny it." Tears blurred her vision. She shook her head, struggling to steady her voice. "You say that now, but what if it changes? What if I am not enough?" His eyes burned with intensity. "Then it will be my failure, not yours. But hear me, there is no safety without you. I will not let them take you from me." Naomi felt the weight of years lift, replaced by something terrifying yet liberating. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the billionaire on magazine covers, but a man standing stripped of armor, choosing her in defiance of the world. In that moment, the fortress around both their hearts cracked wide, the truth spilling into the silence like light into dark. Naomi did not sleep that night. She sat by the window in her room, watching rain trail down the glass, in silver ribbons, her mind churning with her mother's words and Ethan's confession. At dawn, she packed a small bag, slipping out of the estate. Before the staff stirred, she could not bear to trap Ethan in a war between sisters, nor endure being the wedge her mother drove deeper. She returned to her tiny apartment above the laundromat, the place that smelled of detergent and fried food from the diner downstairs, but it felt like air after suffocating walls. She brewed cheap coffee, sat at the chipped table, and tried to steady herself. The knock at the door came hours later. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, rain dripping from his coat, his hair damp, his eyes dark with worry. "You left," he said simply. "I thought it best," she answered, her voice thin. "You do not need the burden of my family tearing at you. I will not be the reason you are dragged through scandal." He stepped inside without waiting for permission, the force of his presence filling the small apartment. "Do you think I care about scandal? I have faced hostile boards, lawsuits, betrayals worth millions. None of it mattered. But the thought of losing you, Naomi, that is the first thing that has truly terrified me in years." She stared, disbelieving. "You do not even know how to love me. You said you married me for stability, for convenience." His expression broke raw in a way she had never seen. "Yes, I was a coward. I told myself choosing you meant safety, that you would never demand what I was afraid to give. But I was blind. You were never the safe choice. You were the brave one. You walked into this marriage knowing you might be crushed by it, and still you stood with dignity. I need you, Naomi, not for safety, for everything." Tears slid down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. "All my life I was told I was less, that I should step aside, give way. You do not know what it means to finally be seen." Ethan closed the space between them slowly, as if afraid she might vanish. "Then let me prove I see you. Let me earn you not as duty, not as convenience, but as the only woman I want at my side." Her sob turned into a laugh edged with disbelief. "You do not make promises lightly." "No," he said, voice rough, "and I am not promising perfection. I am promising that I will not walk away." She trembled, her heart pounding so loud it filled the silence. Then, with a breath that felt like a leap off a cliff, she whispered, "I love you." The words seemed to shatter something inside him. He cupped her face gently, reverently, his thumb brushing away tears. "And I love you," he said, as though the admission had waited too long. His lips found hers, not rushed, not hesitant, but sure, carrying the weight of all the walls that had finally crumbled. The kiss deepened, steady and fierce, and Naomi felt the world tilt until only the two of them remained. When they pulled apart, she leaned her forehead against his chest, listening to the thud of his heart. For the first time, she felt not invisible, not plain, but chosen. He held her close, whispering into her hair, "You will never stand in the shadows again." "Not while I breathe." The room was small, the rain still fell, but within those walls, something vast and unshakable was born. Naomi closed her eyes and let it settle into her bones, the truth that love had finally found her, not in the form she expected, but in the one she needed. spring unfolded, slowly softening the edges of winter around the Blackwell estate. The gardens that had once felt like sterile exhibits now bloomed with color tulips pushing through soil branches heavy with new green. Naomi walked the paths in the early mornings, a mug of coffee in her hand, Ethan often joining her before his day consumed him. They spoke little yet, the silence was no longer cold. It was a rhythm, a companionship that breathed life into spaces once hollow. Society pages continued to chatter, some still mocking others, grudgingly admiring, but Naomi no longer read them. She had Ethan's eyes on her at the breakfast table, his hand brushing hers, when he passed her a section of the paper, and that was enough. Isabella withdrew from public view after her attempts to reclaim the spotlight failed. She stormed through interviews at first, painting Naomi as an interloper, but the world tired quickly of her bitterness. Eventually, she left the city for Los Angeles, chasing a career in fashion. Her absence a silence that rang louder than her presence ever had. Mrs. Carter remained cold, her pride wounded beyond repair. She sent no letters, made no calls. Though Naomi sometimes wondered if her mother still clipped articles from the newspaper, watching from afar as the daughter she dismissed stood steady beside a billionaire. Time layered itself gently. Naomi began hosting small gatherings at the estate, not glittering galas but intimate dinners for friends, colleagues from the cafe she once worked at, even staff members who had once avoided her eyes. She filled the sterile halls with warmth, with laughter, with life. Ethan, at first uncertain, grew to linger at these gatherings, his stern edges softening as he listened to Naomi's friends tell stories of her kindness long before his world collided with hers. He began to see her not as someone who had stepped into his life, but as someone who had always been walking toward him. One evening he returned from a business trip to find Naomi in the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, her hair pulled back, laughter spilling from her lips, as she and a housekeeper attempted a recipe that had gone wrong. For a moment, Ethan stood in the doorway, struck by the vision of home he had not realized he craved. He crossed to her, brushing a streak of flour from her cheek, his voice softer than the hum of the oven. "You make this place alive." Naomi smiled, her eyes shining. It was never dead. It was just waiting for someone to notice. Their marriage shifted, deepened, blossomed. They no longer spoke of contracts or convenience. They spoke of mornings and futures, of where Naomi dreamed of opening her cafe, of how Ethan could use his influence to support small businesses like hers. She taught him the value of slowing down, of savoring the small. He taught her that strength could be shared, not born alone. On their first anniversary, Ethan led her into the library, where he had cleared a space for her designs. Blueprints lay across a desk, financial backing secured the location already chosen. Naomi stared in shock, tears filling her eyes. "You did this." He took her hands in his. "We did this. Your dream is ours now." She pressed her lips to his gratitude, and love entwined in the gesture, and whispered, "You were never the safe choice for me either. You were the leap." In the months that followed, the cafe took shape, a sunlit space on a busy street, painted warm colors, its shelves lined with books, and its counters always filled with the smell of fresh bread. Naomi poured herself into it, and Ethan came often, sometimes in a suit, sometimes simply to sit with coffee while she worked. Customers whispered in awe at seeing him there, yet he seemed only a man, content to watch his wife shine in her element. The day of the grand opening, Naomi stood behind the counter as a line stretched out the door. Ethan entered quietly, carrying a bouquet of lavender tied with ribbon. He placed it on the counter and leaned close enough that only she could hear. "You are my brave one," he murmured. She kissed his cheek, smiling with a light that had once been hidden but now burned openly. Life settled into a steady, joyful cadence. They shared breakfast on the terrace, long walks through the gardens, evenings reading by lamplight. Naomi no longer felt the chill of the vast house. It had become a home because it carried their footsteps together. She still visited her small apartment, sometimes not out of longing, but to remind herself of where she had begun. She kept the chipped table, the notebook filled with early sketches, as symbols of the path she had walked. Ethan respected this understanding that her strength came from remembering she had built her life, not simply been given it. One summer evening, they hosted friends in the garden, lanterns glowing as laughter drifted across the lawn. Naomi stood by Ethan's side, her hand resting in his, her eyes sweeping the scene with quiet wonder. She thought of her mother's words, of Isabella's disdain, of all the voices that once told her she was not enough. And then she looked at Ethan, at the way he gazed at her, as if no one else existed, and she knew the truth she had never been lacking. She had only been waiting for someone to see her fully. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Ethan drew her aside beneath the arch of roses heavy with bloom. The night was soft stars scattered above them. He cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheek. "Do you know what I feared most when I met you?" She shook her head. "That you would see past me," he admitted, "that you would find the man inside the fortress and decide he was not worth the risk, but you stayed. You leapt. And because of that, I have everything." Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "You were never the safe choice, Ethan, but you were the right one." He smiled rare and unguarded and kissed her beneath the stars. The world around them faded, leaving only the warmth of two souls who had found one another against all odds. And in that moment, the plain sister no one wanted, and the billionaire who once sought only safety, stood bound by something greater than wealth or beauty. They stood bound by love, steady, brave, undeniable.